conventional way to own gold is to buy coins at high cost and hide them at home, or pay annual fees to store them in a vault where they just sit there. Monetary metals is different. With monetary metals, you buy gold just above spot and then put it to work so that you're earning interest, paid out not in dollars, but in more ounces of gold. To top it off, there are 0 vault fees. So stop having your metal just sit there. Upgrade to monetary metals today and start earning interest on it. Upgrade at interestongold.com/David. That's interestongold.com/David. From the heart of Central Florida, you're listening to the most electrifying show in media. A Neighbor's Choice. And I'm your host, David Granosky. Welcome to the program. So glad we could have you join us together in our Sunshine State headquarters, where all things are going to be dissected in the news. We're going to unpack fake news. We're going to show you how it's all rooted in the lie of collectivism and all the different myths that pop up to try to cloud our judgment, destroy our discernment as human persons made in the image of God that we are. Our website is aneighborschoice.com, and you can also join us right now on live stream on YouTube or Facebook. If you can find it, it's kind of like looking for a needle in a haystack, because they do not like content that challenges the toxic corporatist status quo that those little gatekeepers and those platforms want to, to promote and to support. And so you have to always rely on our website at neighborschoice.com, or if you're listening on the radio, make sure you save it to this station, because this is the beginning of the media revolution, and you and I are at the tip of the spear of a new kind of conversation, one that cuts through the noise and confusion, the groupthink, the tribalism, and really gets to the meat of the matter. So I titled this section of our show today, Why Twitter is a Hellscape. And I mean that basically for specifically Twitter. And of course, the other social media platforms are awful in their own way too. But why is it that the media cycle gets so twisted and convoluted by Twitter? Well, think about it this way. First of all, Twitter is where a lot of the elitist journalists and academic types get on in their little hive mind and do their little Gossip Girl magazine type snottiness and hatefulness to people they don't like. And so, unlike Facebook, which is more for, and it's not one or the other is better. I'm just saying that, in terms of the public pages, Facebook doesn't have the same, appeal for the journalistic, chatterati classes that want to shape discourse in the favor of corporate communism and all that slop that comes from the Nick Woke University system. And so, Twitter is kind of their platform of choice. And then it's got a bunch of conservatives that basically just react to whatever it's like Mean Girls, the movie. Ever seen the Mean Girls movie? And you have this little clique, and they think they're better than everybody. And then you have all these other little cliques trying to react and try to out-compete in imitation of the Mean Girls clique. That's what you get on Twitter. And, a lot of folks in conservative Inc. and the new generation have made their entire platform dependent on this one button, delete, that the folks at Twitter can do at any time for their entire voice, their entire catalog. And you look at some of the things these folks tweet, and again, you see hundreds of thousands of tweets that they've made. And you think to yourself, my goodness, this platform's only been around for a few years. What, 2007 or something, 6? 100,000s of tweets? What else do you have to do in your life? Go out and do something, And, I understand that these things can be, I'm not going to be one that acts like I'm immune to the addictive nature of social media. Of course, it's very enthralling to get on there and get into the mix of news and so forth. But I want to explain why the Twitter platform in particular is such a hellscape and how it impacts your society. So for one, Twitter is where all the folks who have platforms at places like NPR and New York Times and Washington Post and all these platforms that have a little bit bigger of a megaphone. That's where they get their groupthink congealed together on Twitter. That's where they come to their apparent consensus. Of course, you've got private email lists and things like that, but in terms of a public platform of creating and congealing and solidifying the groupthink du jour of the day, it's going to happen on that platform a lot for these folks. And, what happens is with Twitter is because it has no differentiation. There's no boundaries. You can go on to a celebrity's, post and make a comment. And maybe sometimes that celebrity will read it if it gets enough traction from the mob that joins in liking or sharing that statement. So it creates this, what we call an anthropology, which is something I look at a lot on this program, as you know. It creates what we call a crisis of undifferentiation, in which there's no boundaries of the self anymore. When you have an orderly society, you have healthy boundaries. You ever hear about that idea of having healthy boundaries in relationships, healthy boundaries in a family, healthy boundaries in a workplace, right? If you had a business where nobody has any hierarchy, the CEO's word doesn't mean anything more than the person who's part-time or an intern. Doesn't, the person who's good at marketing, his word doesn't have any more sway than the person who's good at finance as it pertains to branding. If everybody's just undifferentiated, that would create chaos, right? It'd create a disorderly environment for organizations to be able to make sense of things. And so that's something that you get on Twitter. The entire business model of Twitter is based on this crisis of undifferentiation. Now, in ancient communities, when you would have a crisis of undifferentiation, that means that people are imitating each other too much. They're looking a little too same. We see this all the time in various ways, but we try to disguise it with haircuts and so forth. But ends up that we try to come up with these bizarre new hairstyles, and everybody's got the same bizarre hairstyle that we do to try to distinguish ourselves. But in the old times, when you had these crises of undifferentiation, where everybody's just copying everybody, it's just a endless sea of peer pressure. And what happens is, in the ancient world, they would find a candidate for them to create meaning around, saying, hey, you know what, I don't like you, and you don't like me, and this person doesn't like that person, and this person doesn't this or that. All that contagious envy and jealousy. Oh, you look more popular than me. How many followers do you have on your Twitter? How many do you have on that? That's all people care about. Every day they measure the voices of people based on their little Twitter algorithm, how much engagement, how many followers. And so they all want to stand out. They all want to stand out in a sea of sameness. And how do you stand out in a sea of sameness? Well, one way is you try to fit in better than anybody else. You try to find that thing that the crowd will delight in better than anybody else. Isn't that a weird paradox? Trying to stand out by trying to fit in better than anybody else. Trying to find that little sweet spot of a perfect little point, hot take as they call it, to be able to stand out in a sea of sameness. So please acknowledge my existence, people want. But the reason why it causes problems is a lot of folks are anonymous on there, don't know how many of those accounts are robots, and because they give you the follower account, the follower number is public and all that, it creates this hyper competitiveness. But there's also anonymity involved, right? Because you can have hundreds of people come out and attack you, and you don't know who they are. If they're a robot, is it a virtual reality? You don't know what it is. Anytime a Democrat sees something they dislike, like if someone says, hey, Joe Biden went and he bombed people of color all over the world, they can't handle that. Their mind shuts off and they say, Russian bot, Russian bot, Russian bot, because they've been conditioned by the same little Mean Girls clique that sets the agenda for news media, and they congregate on Twitter. So it's a nasty cesspool of envy, jealousy, covetousness, competitiveness, and it's always in search of a scapegoat. Have you noticed that? That's where you get the foundation of cancel culture as we understand it today. Cancel culture is just Nothing new. That's why I call the far left or whatever a reactionary movement, because there's nothing progressive about it in any kind of shape or form. It is a reactionary movement that's based on going back and trying to repeal history past 0 AD, right? Past the beginning of the personhood revolution, and trying to go back in time to this ancient barbaric past that we all want to forget actually exists, in which scapegoating and sacrificing human beings was the way we found order. And so what do the folks do? Just like the old times of the old past, they're always in search of a scapegoat. Every day, it's some video of somebody that didn't wear a mask or didn't do this. Or remember, it was Dr. Stella Emanuel. I covered her on the program. She's an African immigrant doctor. And she was shamed because she had religious views that were considered outside the norm of the fashionable, trendy, consensus. And that's okay to have a disagreement, but they were trying to mock her because of her immigrant status and the way they talked about her as some kind of superstitious person. It was sick. But they every day, they look for a scapegoat. If Rush Limbaugh gets an announcement that his cancer is not doing well, you'll see that trending. Oh, look. And it's all they ever do is just talk about trying to scapegoat and dehumanize people. That's all they ever do. Why is that? It's because Twitter is revealing something that has been rooted in us for thousands and thousands of years in our anthropology. It's rooted in our ritual behavior of what we do as a crowd. And they have found a way to monetize that baser crowd mindset that civilization has been trying to grow us up out of for 2,000 years or longer. And so it's a very primitive, barbaric, ugly, reactionary, bigoted platform, Twitter. And it's not that it's doing anything to humans, really. It's just kind of unmasking, unveiling the baser reality of what we can expect if we try to do the impossible, which is to repeal the personhood revolution of Jesus and bring us back down into the gutter of the crowd. That's the thing they're trying to do. They don't know what they're doing because they're lost in a sea of copying. They don't know what they want. They don't know what they desire, but they know that they want to compete with those around them. That's the hellscape of Twitter, and you can hear it. You can feel it as it percolates into the news media around us, and we have to learn what it is so that we can learn to grow up away from this garbage. Back in just a moment, live on A Neighbor's Choice.
A lawsuit is not something that anyone looks forward to. It's a stressful process. There are attorneys in Tampa Bay that keep clients well-informed, creating less stress. That law firm is Catania. Personal injury law is defended with full disclosure. There is no guessing game. If it's an auto accident, medical malpractice, nursing home negligence, unsafe working conditions, or motorcycle accidents, the law firm of Catania will handle the process worry-free from start to finish. Many victims don't realize they have a claim for the loss until they talk to Catania. They only represent private individuals and treat every case as if it's going to trial. Putting families first is more than just a slogan. It's their way of practicing law. It's a commitment to you. Remember, they don't get paid if you don't get paid. So go to Catania.com. Over 28 years in practice. Catania, personal injury, auto, and motorcycle accident attorneys. Catania, putting families first.
Office Tampa. Not attorney spokeswoman.
Not ready to go to your favorite seafood restaurant? Get the highest quality fish for less, delivered straight to your door by Fast Fresh Seafood. Order our fresh hot snapper, grouper, mahi, and more. They're boneless, skinless, flash frozen the same day and individually vacuum wrapped. Pick the size filet you want, the amount you want, and checkout's easy at fastfreshseafood.com. The best thing, every fish is on sale. Fastfreshseafood.com. Caught fresh for you, delivered straight to you. Stay home and stay safe.
I'm attorney Young Kim. The financial problems caused by the coronavirus nightmare are not going away anytime soon. If you are behind on your credit card or mortgage payments, or bill collectors are harassing you, there are ways to get them off your back and legally wipe the slate clean. Call Consumer Law Attorneys at 888-99-FRESH for a free consultation. Learn how we can stop the bank and collection companies and help people in debt get a fresh start. Call 888-99-FRESH, 37374. Main office, St. Petersburg.
Let's face it, these are stressful times. new routines, the constant bombardment of bad news, and trying to keep you and your family safe all the time. It's Frank for Center for Men's Health. During these stressful times, your mood is so critical, and nothing's more important to a guy's mood than testosterone. The single greatest issue for guys with low T is mood, and the single greatest change for men that get low T care is a greatly improved mood. Many are grumpy when they start, and most can't believe how much their mood improves once they get treated. And everything improves once your mood improves. Feel the difference C4MH.com can make in your life. I've been a patient of C4MH.com for a couple of years, and recently I've lost 20 pounds because now I have the energy to work out from home. And that'll put you in a good mood too. C4MH.com's express treatment plan is convenient, affordable, and above all, safe. And with locations all up and down West Florida, there's one near you right now. Find out more. Go to C4MH.com.
So everybody in these social media platforms, Twitter being the best example of it, they're trying to stand out by fitting in better than anybody else. And what is everybody trying to do? They're all trying to do the same thing. So they're all copying each other, all desiring the same thing. And the thing that they want to do is be able to act like they are the arbiter of reality, that they can create the narrative that they didn't create. They just identified the truth that nobody else had seen before. And part of being someone like a Christian is that you recognize that everything you're saying is just imitation. The prophets, the church fathers, the disciples, Jesus, even Jesus himself says everything he says is unoriginal. He says he's just imitating his Father in heaven, and he's imitating the prophets who came before him. But everybody on Twitter tries to act like they're the original arbiter of the narrative that they think nobody, let me give you an example. So this isn't Twitter, but it's probably, this is an example of the kind of concept that we're looking at. Deadline.com. Joe Biden tops Donald Trump in TV viewership for first night of convention by Ted Johnson. The first night of the Republican National Convention drew 15.8 million viewers across 6 networks, a significant fall off from the 18.7 million who tuned in to the Democratic National Convention debut evening. Now, what does he want you to know? Well, a related story on Deadline.com, or who runs this thing. But it says, Republican Convention Night 1 review. Lots of grievance and lots of Trump dominates low energy Biden bashing fest. Now, they really want you to believe, apparently. I don't know who this site is. Some blog. They really want you to believe that they're just defining objective reality. And they really want you to believe in that fantasy with them. Now, was it low energy? I didn't really pay attention to too much. I saw the speech by Kimberly Guilfoyle, or whatever her name is. And, that seemed like a Klingon speech or something from Star Trek where they go, it was kind of creepy and weird. A little bit too high energy, but hey, maybe she really believes in those things. Who knows? And, so it was a little weird. That wasn't quite low energy there. Of course, Nikki Haley, my goodness. What is the difference between Nikki Haley and every failed Republican establishment person that they've put on? Think about what is the difference between her views and George W. Bush, McCain, Romney, Mitch McConnell, Paul Ryan. What in the world is the difference? And that's why you can understand why folks could be a little skeptical of whatever Trump's saying about he's going to shake up the establishment, is that you're putting everybody in your administration are like Nikki Haley types. Establishment, so the very people who hate and despise Trump, he still wants to have them, have feature primetime positions to talk about their warmongering silliness and the old, outdated, stale ideas that have failed every time the society has considered them. So that was low energy for sure. But again, the point is, they're wanting to shape the narrative. Look, what this person's trying to do is he's trying to say in this story, almost 3 million more people watched the first day of my team's party than the other team. That's what he wants you to know. And he thinks that makes him have power. See how they act like they're not religious, but that's some primitive gobbledygook right there, right? My team has more people than your team watching on the day one of the festival. What does that mean? Is that how you're going to solve healthcare? Is that how you're going to create nuclear fusion to stop pollution? Is that how you're going to figure out that the paradigm shift for cancer research needs to move in the direction of the mitochondria? They don't know any. See what I mean? So when you're watching this program, you're getting the future news. When you watch everybody else, you're getting the stupid stuff where people, I got 3 million people listening to my team better than your team on day one. That is the level. Think about it. Somebody has a job and they're supposed to be the arbiter of news. Who don't know who this guy is? I don't want to pick out people's personalities. I don't like going there. But whoever this guy is, Ted, he's getting a full-time job apparently, and what has he got to say? Is he going to talk about Dr. Thomas Seyfried like we do about the therapeutic ketosis that's being used for cancer? He can't go there because that's not what the cool team's saying. But it's what he thinks is the cool team. It's the old ideas, stupid groupthink team that he's, getting his cues from. But all he can tell you is that my team's better, and I can write a news story to make it look like my team's better because it's got more people. That's all they can say. Sad, isn't it? Pitiful. Pathetic. So what kind of media are you going to be a part of? Are you going to be a part of that kind of drivel? That stupid nonsense? That's what the Twitter hellscape is all about. It's all about mindless competition. Mindless, look, my team has more tweet likes than yours. That's your level of discourse. Do you know how to create cold fusion? Do you know, that's not even a thing you're allowed to talk about, right? Because they did an experiment in 1989. It wasn't replicated. So therefore, you can't talk about it. That's not what the establishment tells me to talk about. That's what it means to be Mick Woke. Mick Woke. That's what it's all about. That's what Twitter is. It's a hellscape of Mick Wokeness. And the folks in the conservative media, they're desperate. Me too. Look at me. Look at me. I got more tweets than you did. I canceled this lib. Wow, look. And it's all meaningless. There's nothing masculine about being on Twitter. There's nothing masculine about being a little tweeter, a little follower. There's plenty of little followers. What humanity needs are people who don't even care about the crowd. People who want to solve problems. Because we've got a lot of problems, don't we? People who want to use their talents and say, you know what, I don't care if your team has 18 million and this one has 14 million. That doesn't mean anything to me. What matters to me is the truth. What matters to me is reality itself. And reality is not going to be mediated by some social stupid scoreboard of a bunch of mindless, imitating clowns, desperate for anonymity and desperate for some sense of meaning by being the exact same as everybody else. And they're going to try to scapegoat people to find meaning, but it won't work. Because they're playing in the sandbox of Jesus' reality. Scapegoating will never create unity anymore. Because Jesus destroyed it on the cross. And now these mob witch hunts, they will always fail and backfire on those who are self-righteously still believing in their efficacy. A Neighbor's Choice will be back in a moment. Stay tuned.
You know what time of year it is.
Hurricane conditions in the next 36 hours.
You know what hurricanes can do.
Devastating damage expected.
Well, we want you to know, no matter how bad things get,
Power outages. This is life-threatening.
you can stay up to date with the latest information here. your home for news, talk, and information. And remember, we'll keep an eye on the tropics. You keep an ear on us.
Got batteries in the flashlight.
The all-new News Talk 1040 WHBO.
Yeah, we got our radios.
Houston already hit hard by this pandemic, now in the danger zone for Hurricane Laura, the Category 1 storm gaining strength in the Gulf. Mayor Sylvester Turner urged residents to prepare.
The tracking of this storm has been somewhat unpredictable, but what is consistent is that this is a dangerous storm.
Mandatory evacuations underway in coastal areas of both Texas and Louisiana. The First Lady, tonight's keynote speaker at the Republican National Convention. The backdrop, the White House, the focus, 4 more years.
When Melania Trump steps up to the microphone tonight, her chief of staff, Stephanie Grisham, says the First Lady will offer an optimistic look at the country.
It's very uplifting. It's very positive. It reflects on her time as First Lady and some of her favorite moments. There's a couple moments in there that I think will be really key.
Grisham saying this will be one of Melania Trump's longest speeches ever, and after plagiarism claims involving her 2016 convention address, Grisham saying every word will be Mrs. Trump.
Welcome back to A Neighbor's Choice. I'm David Gronowski, your host. And we're joined now by my friend James Cortides, who joins me in the Tampa Bay area. He's someone who has a YouTube channel, James Cortides. You can look it up on YouTube. He's got a video out called Wrestling with Christianity, which was published just a few days ago, and I wanted to have him on to kind of continue this line of thinking. How you doing, James?
Hey, David. Thanks for having me on. Glad to be with you today.
Yeah, it's great to hear from you. And I was just talking about why Twitter is such a hellscape for folks. Like, why is it that it has so much more influence than, say, Facebook? Because that's where a lot of the folks in the media, at the old kind of TV party media and the old gatekeeper news media establishment, they all go there and try to come up with a fashionista, trendy thing to say today. And yet it's always trying to create scapegoating. It's always trying to cancel people's existence, make them feel utterly ashamed of their very reality. Why do you think that kind of cancel culture exists and never can find any resolution on Twitter?
Yeah, that's a great question with regards to Twitter. I've attempted a few times to get on and participate. It's just the format and the way that it kind of operates. I never was able to resonate with it. But the way that these, the legacy media folks get on Twitter and kind of develop a different persona, like a different side of their personality comes out of them. And I think that's a function of all of the social media. But you're right, it is the worst on Twitter. And it concerns me is because, we're looking to AI in the future, and the AI is going to kind of save us and be our savior here. But if we see what happened with the technologies of social media and Twitter, with the algorithms, what do we think is going to happen when AI brings the worst out of human beings? So it's a really terrible thing that's happening on Twitter. And to your point, that scapegoating mechanism is attempting, and it keeps short-circuiting itself as it's trying to find its next victim. And it's just that I wonder what the end game for Twitter is going to be. Hopefully we can kind of take it back and make it something worthwhile. But I don't know. I might have to go by the way of MySpace.
Well, James, it's these platforms are, in some sense possessing the humans that become consumed by them. And they're revealing something about human nature that I think is important for us if we want to build the communities and the families that we all, desire. And one of the things that I think about is how with these platforms, you can see that humanity is haunted by the cross. They're unable, everybody's trying to pretend to be a victim. And some are real victims. But in most cases, it's people trying to show that they stand on the side of the victim the most. And the way I picture it is, in politically correct culture that's fomented by these platforms, it's like they're trying to convince people that they stood in solidarity with Jesus by his cross, that they were the only one in the crowd that did not draw into silence and abandonment of Jesus. They're trying to show by their signaling of being concerned about whatever victim identity group scandal of the day is, and by attacking anybody who is not, adhering to the strict, ever-changing holiness codes of political correctness. They're trying to signal to the world that actually I am either Jesus himself, because I am the victim being crucified because of my identity group, or two, that I am the one who went against the entire crowd persecuting Christ. And I stand and I said the whole time, no, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. And guess what? They're crucifying me because I'm the one that could resist the temptation of the crowd. Now, the Gospels tell us, James, that nobody could resist the power of the crowd, that even his best disciples were either just silent and letting it happen, and they stood quietly as he's being crucified, or that they were actively betraying or selling him out. And so, that's what's really going on in these platforms today. Do you see that too?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it's very interesting that these very intelligent, highly educated folks on Twitter are completely unaware of what they're doing and how they're behaving, where it seems so obvious to people that are outside of the Twitter sphere and looking at how vicious and vitriolic these attacks are against their fellow colleagues. And it's something that it does look like they are trying to have kind of a victim contest to see who's the greatest oppressor and oppressed, completely unaware of the roots of caring about victims in the first place. And it's interesting with regards to the idea, and I don't mean to bring up eschatology here, but the Antichrist is not against Christ. The Antichrist is instead of Christ. So what the Antichrist is going to manifest as this hyper Jesus like figure that is is going to be look like self-righteous and look like they're doing the right thing, but it's exactly the opposite. I think the best thing to do with Twitter is to do what Jesus did in front of the crowd when they were going to stone the Samaritan woman, and not look into the eyes of the crowd. That means just don't get on Twitter. Just don't get involved in that, in that sphere. A little bit that I put myself through that, I just would, I find myself being pulled into these kind of arguments as well. So I just stopped it,
Yeah, it's a good point. And I do think, and it's, again, I don't want to scapegoat Twitter here. I'm just using them as a symbol of exactly the kind of forces that are taking place in our conversations today. So it's not any unique, formula or secret recipe that Twitter has, but they perfected it well, and it's created a kind of way to really think. Because here's the thing that I see. If we don't understand, if we don't use these moments to illustrate the power and the uniqueness of Jesus in history, then we're never going to learn from the mistakes and learn to, stop doing the stuff that we're all disliking. And part of that learning process is being able to understand that this appetite, what Trump calls it the witch hunts, when they tried to arrest him and his staff and everybody because they said, hey, let's get along with the nuclear power like Russia. And we use this word witch hunt, but that's more true than what Trump understands. It's this phenomenon in which we are always trying to find a witch to burn or to cancel someone. This idea of canceling people is not progressive. It's reactionary. It's a reaction to the forgiveness that Jesus brings into history to make relationships right between those who have oppressed and those who've been on the losing side of that oppression.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's interesting to see kind of how this is going to pan out, because it doesn't seem that there's any awareness of what's going on in all of the spheres. You're right. It's not just Twitter. And kind of what's going to pan out here.
In your video, Wrestling with Christianity, I like it. It's on YouTube. People can search for it. You talk about, you examine some of the different ancient communities and their practice of sacrifice. And I thought that was very illustrative. And you pointed out a few examples, but just kind of give folks in Radio Land a little glimpse at that, this practice of sacrifice, of how human beings sacrifice people all over the world, even communities that didn't know each other, right?
Yeah, and this is an insight that I got from one of your videos on your Things Hidden podcast, and it kind of blew me away when I started looking into it. And if I'm wrestling with my Christian faith as as much as anybody else right now, and just doing a cursory search of the history of human sacrifice on the internet, you'll see that it's not talked about a lot, and it situates the stories in the Bible, especially the story of Abraham and Isaac, and a lot of the critiques of Christianity that I was drawn to was this idea of how could God come to Abraham and tell him to sacrifice his son Isaac? What is this deal of human sacrifice that this God is putting forth here? How could this loving God be doing such horrible things? And the idea is that through Christ and through the history of the Gospels, we see the idea of human sacrifice lead to animal sacrifice, and then through Christ sacrifice, through the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, the idea was ended that the sacrifice of a human being, it was done throughout history for reasons that seem kind of superficial. The opening of a new village, the building of a new building, they would sacrifice a human, a lot of time a child, and they would bury that child, that human sacrifice, in one of the pillars when they were erecting one of the buildings in the village. And this was done throughout history, throughout the globe. In China, in India, they found instances of this type of sacrifice. The Mayans, the Aztecs, and Egypt and Japan. If you just, again, do a quick search, you'll see a very interesting history here. And the thing that stood out the most to me was even in Stonehenge, they found a victim that was buried in one of the stones. And the idea is that this victim was a sacrifice to bless Stonehenge. The idea of sacrificing a human being to bless, whether it's the village or to bless, a group that's going through something, was quite normal. And the idea that Jesus came and said, stop eating each other, stop sacrificing each other. I mean, cannibalism was also involved in it. And he said, here, eat from my blood and from my flesh, metaphorically. And that insight, I was like, if people can really grok that and understand that, it's kind of life changing.
Yeah, it is life changing, and you did a great summary. And for folks tuning in, you're not listening to Coast to Coast. You're actually listening to, documented anthropological evidence of the record of human sacrifice in our history. And it sounds, I know people who are listening to this for the first time, they might be saying, that sounds so strange. This feels like Coast to Coast. Where's George Norrie? But it's not. This is extremely real to your life. It's extremely real to your understanding of politics, that you understand the history that our politics is borrowing from. We think that, humans have just been walking around rationalizing our ideas all this time, and we really haven't been using reason. We've been using primitive rituals like sacrifice to create meaning. And what you said was well put, that Jesus comes into history and he defeats this process of human sacrifice for meaning. And we're in the middle of that right now, James. We're in the middle of, Jesus said, it is finished, right? And now we can trace a line from Jesus saying, what is finished? Well, the human behavior of sacrifice. It's not going to go on without it being exposed and broken by the light of the gospel, right? And so now we're in this world where we're looking at Twitter. We got Paula Deen getting scapegoated. We got everybody being sacrificed, but nobody finds any meaning out of it. We don't agree. There's nobody who has been canceled where you do a poll and it says 100% of Americans agree that this person was a villain. Nobody even does that. That's because of Jesus breaking the power of sacrifice to unite us, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the question is, what does that do for society now that we don't have this mechanism that used to, restore a semblance of order? Every society eventually degenerates into chaos. And this idea and this process of the human sacrifice that discharged the tension and the violence in the community, that has been short-circuited. And I agree. I think we're seeing little instances and big instances of this in social media, but the process is not leading to this kind of reconciliation. It's kind of increasing in scope, and it's increasing in intensity. I don't know what this will lead to, or if there is not a reappreciation and a re-understanding of what the story of Christ was. And that's why I love what you're doing with your radio show. That's why I started my YouTube channel, is try to just get this information out there, because the idea is forgiveness. What happened to forgiveness? It was such a primal way of uniting people outside of this kind of cruel scapegoating mechanism. What is the answer here? If it's not, we can't fall back on this fake semblance of order that was the scapegoat.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I like that. So you're saying we have this battle between forgiveness and vainly trying to scapegoat people. So if we're having forgiveness, well, what's the kind of attitude we have to have that gives us a heart of forgiveness? I think
humility.
Go ahead.
Humility.
Yeah,
right?
Humility. And what's the kind of attitude you have to want to tear someone down as a scapegoat, to cancel them, to delete them, to humiliate them?
Yes, pride, right?
Mm-hmm.
Pride and unawareness of the pride.
So that's the situation we're at. If you have a thankful heart, if you have a gratitude attitude, if you have a grateful attitude, then you're not going to go into the snowball effect of trying to blame other people, whether you're blaming Biden or Hillary Clinton or Trump or whoever it is in the workplace, whoever it is, trying to blame somebody for your problems. You can't do that and still have a grateful heart, can you?
No, absolutely not. And an interesting thing there is these people, these folks on Twitter that are in the media, a lot of them practice actually meditation and really understand, the New Age concept of forgiveness and compassion, which has kind of entered the consciousness. You would think that would lead to an awareness of it. But again, without that change in heart, without that metanoia, where Christ comes in, without that happening, no matter how much you try to intellectualize compassion and forgiveness, when things become intense, you will automatically fall back to those old mechanisms. So I think there has to be a reckoning with Christ. And I know it's difficult to even, it's something I'm wrestling with. How do you scale this idea that has been so ridiculed or degenerated over time, I think purposefully, especially in this day and age where it seems we're so far away from a really authentic understanding of Christ and his message.
That's a great thought. How do we scale this? How do we make the imitation of Jesus something that catches on socially? What does that look like? We'll pick this up when we return live on A Neighbor's Choice. Don't miss it. Back in a moment.
A lawsuit is not something that anyone looks forward to. It's a stressful process. There are attorneys in Tampa Bay that keep clients well informed, creating less stress. That law firm is Catania. Personal injury law is defended with full disclosure. There is no guessing game. If it's an auto accident, medical malpractice, nursing home negligence, unsafe working conditions, or motorcycle accidents, the law firm of Catania will handle the process worry-free from start to finish. Many victims don't realize they have a claim for the loss until they talk to Catania. They only represent private individuals and treat every case as if it's going to trial. Putting families first is more than just a slogan. It's their way of practicing law. It's a commitment to you. Remember, they don't get paid if you don't get paid. So go to Catania.com. Over 28 years in practice. Catania, personal injury, auto, and motorcycle accident attorneys. Catania, putting families first.
Office Tampa. Not attorney spokeswoman.
David Gronowski here. Let me tell you about a man named Gabriel. Every day, Gabriel puts on his boots and drives across America to make sure our store shelves stay stocked with the food people count on. See, Gabriel served our country overseas. He knows that America stands for freedom, quality, and caring for others the way we would like to be treated. That's why when Gabriel saw food shelves getting low during the pandemic, he hit the road as a driver with Oakley Transport. In the land of the free, where no one should go hungry, we need heroes like Gabriel to help keep America fed. CDLA driving professionals. Join Oakley Transport today. Keep America fed. Visit oakleytransport.com or call them today at 1-877-8-TANKER. That's 1-877-8-TANKER. A Neighbor's Choice is back. David Gronowski, your host, is here. And I'm joined by James Cortides, who is a friend in the Tampa Bay area and someone you can find on YouTube. Search for his name, James Cortides, or look up this video, Wrestling with Christianity, which he published. I thought it was a great summary of a lot of different things in history from different cultures to understand why our politics is falling apart. So, James, I wanted to ask you kind of where we left off. You said, it's not enough to just do meditation. And I was thinking of Buddhism and some of these Eastern ideas of the annihilation of the self. It's not about that. It's about finding a role model, a human being that you can actually look at their life and model their attitudes, model their disposition, model their choices in times of conflict, model their character. And that would be Jesus, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And in addition to that, if you can, now with this technology that seems to be tearing us apart, you can use it for good. There's a lot of beautiful information out there. And if you just look up the life of the saints of the church, of the archaic saints, St. Maximus the Confessor, look them up and see how their life, they were martyred and what they went through for these ideas. And look them up. I mean, there's a lot of great YouTube channels that you can go to, Patristic Nectar Films, Orthodox Wisdom, Bible Project. There's a lot of great resources out there. And what I think ultimately kind of is happening here is I look at the monasteries and these patristic teachings as the pluripotent stem cells of our culture. And as things degrade, as we're watching them degrade, we need to go back to the source, the DNA of our culture. And that's where you can find this material and it can kind of re-enliven us. But you have to do the work. You have to look. You have to find. And once you read it, your heart cannot be helped but be touched. I mean, the information is just it's charged with divinity. It's powerful. And I don't mean to say this in a kind of light-hearted way. You have to do the work. But I think that's what the monasteries are for. That's what the fathers were there for to do. I tell you, a year ago, if I would have told you that I was looking at the church fathers for wisdom, it would have blown me away. But you have to do it. You have to take the next step and, imitate the saints, learn the life of the saints, and ultimately, imitate the life and works and being of Jesus Christ.
Yeah, and it's interesting the difference between, imitating martyrs versus imitating the world's idea of heroes, right? The world, if you look at the American history, all of the biggest lauded presidents in American history textbooks are always the one that spend money that they shouldn't spend the most, the ones who create the biggest imperial projects for government programs here at home, and the ones who go off in the biggest wars. Those are always the ones lauded as gods. FDR, Wilson, all these folks. And Truman drops the nuclear bomb on Christians in Nagasaki. So these guys are heralded as heroes. And then, the ones who and so you think about that and you say, wait a second, that's kind of like how the ancient world was too. All the biggest Roman, emperors who got worshipped the most were the ones who went and did the most expansion with bloodshed and the most awesome, powerful, and terrifying exploits of violence to the enemies of Rome. And you look at the ancient world even further back and you see that the gods that people worship and create statues for were actually, basically symbols for that same might makes right mentality. And so when you look at that in comparison to martyrs are becoming famous because of their nonviolence, not their coercion. It's because of them showing a witness to peace and love in the midst of being persecuted. And that witness ends up destroying the empire that was persecuting a lot of these folks, right?
Yeah, and ultimately the greatest example of this and a beautiful insight is so Christ, when he came, the Jewish people said that this is our Messiah. He's going to come and he's going to usurp the Romans. He's going to conquer them militarily, and we could laud him as our Messiah. And what did he do? He came and he washed the feet of his servants, and people were dumbfounded. Imagine that happening at that time, and kind of how big of a shock that must be. But that's exactly right. The highest of you will be your servant. And what he did was came and he served sinners, and he preached to sinners, those that needed it the most. And this idea of the low becomes the high, and the lowest of us become exalted. It's interesting when you juxtapose that against what you just said, the different presidents that have this biggest and largest name, when exactly the opposite, humility, seems to be what's the teaching.
And that's why they can't mix. You can't mix Jesus with politics. It's like oil and water. You just can't mix it. And that's, I keep seeing folks on the conservative movement saying, oh, we got to abandon the principles of liberty and things like that because look at the left, they're beating us. It's like, no, they're beating you because you're imitating the left in a dumb, bad way. You can't go and put the genie back in the bottle. You can't go and put the cat back in the bag. You can't go and say, well, Jesus is king, and he says relinquish power to be a leader, and then try to say, well, I'm going to say Jesus is king, and I'm going to vote for this tax and this war and this policy and this sanction and this regime change and this bailout for a bank and this new policy. You can't do that because that shows that you don't witness the reality that Jesus is king by your actions, by who you vote for and what you vote for.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the question is, what is to be done there? How do you care for, political matters when you want to help your fellow man and you want to love your neighbor as yourself and you want others to imitate that? So you show that. How do you do that on a larger scale without getting stuck in the muck and the mire of politics as they've become? It's hard for me to grok that idea that you have to separate the two when I have this impulse inside of me of kind of sharing these ideas that I think will help people not only in their individual life, but obviously collectively as well. And we're in a crisis now. And they say this every 4 years, every 8 years, this is the biggest election, but this is bigger than the election because no matter who gets elected here in November or whenever we find out, there's going to be a shock to the system here. And how are we going to react to that when everybody is in a bigger crisis than we're already in? Yeah, it's an interesting time, and we have to be able to look to the life of Jesus as our guide to imitate. And I was thinking, how do you scale up imitating Jesus in a mass scale? And I think Nikola Tesla makes a great example of this. This is the guy who creates alternating current, electricity, powers the whole world. What a earth-shattering collective scale up of someone's actions imitating Jesus and serving his fellow man with creativity and self-giving. Now, that's what it means to stand against the crowd and get to work, doing things like Nikola Tesla, where you're powering your whole house right now because of the witness of one man. So I appreciate you, James, for coming on the program. James Cortides, you can look him up on YouTube. Check out his video, Wrestling with Christianity. Very good, very informative. And thanks for joining me on the program, James. Thanks, David. Glad to be there. Appreciate you.
Very good. We'll continue in just a moment, live on A Neighbor's Choice for hour 2 of our program. You don't want to miss it. Remember, if you want to see episodes, we have episodes with James that are online only. You can go to aneighborschoice.com, search for it there. And if you want to stay in touch, you can email us, hello@aneighborschoice.com. That's hello@aneighborschoice.com. Always love hearing your guest suggestions, your feedback, your comments about the program, any questions you have, send them to hello@aneighborschoice.com. So that's what it's all about, folks. You got to imitate someone, and that's a humble thing. People don't want to act like they're imitators, but you actually are, and that's the reality of it. Let's get to work knowing that the role models we imitate, they matter, and that means actually imitating them, not just using them as some kind of cheap prop for a group identity. Back in just a moment.